Hello primary 5 students, how are you? Welcome in your science class with me, Dr. Shaimaa Hamdy Kassem, and this is your channel, the Big Sister channel. As now, we will study lesson 2 from concept 2, unit 1. So, are you ready? Yes, we have here activity 4. Food is energy. We studied that the energy flow from plants to animals in the ecosystem. And why? Because the plants produce their own food through the photosynthesis process, as we studied before, and they produce their own food and get energy. But other living organisms can't produce their own food to get energy, so they eat even plants or another animals that eat plants, okay? So they get energy from the food. So all organisms get their energy from their food. So now we will talk about human, and we will know how do we get energy. As food and oxygen that we breathe provide us with energy that we need throughout the day. Any activity that we do needs energy, and we get this energy from the food and the oxygen that we breathe in. Okay? To do any activity, we need energy to do this activity. So activities like what? Like thinking, or breathing, or moving, running, walking. There are some activities require a lot of energy, as hard work and doing exercises. Hard work, like the persons who work in the construction, or as you see here, this is a hard work, so they need more energy, okay? And they get their energy from the food and the oxygen that we breathe. Also, the persons who do exercises, hard exercises, need more energy, okay? So any activities that we do in all day and night, this requires energy. Even we are sleeping, because when we are sleeping, there are some functions in our bodies that need energy, as the heart beats and breathing. We don't stop breathing if we are sleeping, so we need energy, okay? And as we mentioned, there are some activities that need more energy, as doing exercises or hard works. Now we know that the energy flow from the plants to all living organisms. So the question here, what is the primary resource of energy? What do you think? What is the primary resource of energy? From what the energy comes originally? If you said the sun, so you are correct. The primary source of energy comes from the sun. So here the sun is the primary resource of energy for all organisms on earth to live, grow, and carry out life processes. What the meaning of life processes? Growing, breathing, moving, all of these are life processes. So here we have two questions. How plants get energy from the environment, and how animals get energy from the environment. First, we will see the plants. Yes, the plants get the energy from the sunlight. So this sunlight energy is transformed into chemical energy in the sugar in the food of the plants, as we studied before. This is about the plants. So the plants get their energy from the sunlight, okay? And then these sunlight energy transformed into chemical energy in the food of the plants. And then some animals that eat plants get this energy. We have some animals that eat plants only, like what? Yes, like rabbits. And there are some animals that get their energy from eating other animals, as we see here, like tigers, lions. And we have animals that eat both plants and animals, as an example, bear. Okay, so here we see the rabbit eat carrots, so it eats plants. And we have here animals that eat other animal, and an example, the animals that eat both plants and animals. Okay, also from the living organisms that eat both plants and animals, the human, of course, we can eat chicken, meat, fish, and also we can eat plants as vegetables and fruits. So now in this activity we learned that the primary source of energy is the sun, and the plant get its energy from the sunlight and make its own food, and other living organisms get the energy from the plants. So the energy flow from the plants to animals. So now we will study activity 5, food chains. Why it called the food chains? Because the living organisms get the food and therefore their energy from each other, starting from the plants as a chain. Okay, so from plants to animals to another animal, so it looks like the chain. So we can classify the living organisms into 3 groups. This is according to their way of feeding, as we have living organisms that produce their own food like the plants, and we have a group of living organisms that eat other plants or animals. They consume, okay, to get energy. So this is another group, and we will know that there are living organisms that have a function, okay, that we will study now. So we have 3 groups: the living organisms that produce their own food, we can call them producers, and the living organisms that consume or eat other living organisms, so they are consumers. And we have decomposers. Okay, now we will explain each one in details. First, we have producers. They are the organisms that can produce their own food, and they don't feed on other plants or animals. And we have an example, plants. As a plant uses sun energy to produce their own food, which is glucose sugar, which is rich in energy. Okay, as the sunlight energy transforms into chemical energy in the glucose sugar. And then we have the second group, which are the consumers. Those are organisms that eat other living organisms to get their energy, because they can't make their own food. Okay, and we have even these living organisms eat plants, eat the producer. So this is a type of consumers. Like this butterfly eats plant. So this is a type of consumer that's called primary consumer. So butterfly here is a primary consumer. Why? Because it gets energy from the producers. Okay, here imagine that the butterfly is eaten by bird. So the bird here is another type of consumers, which called secondary consumers. And why it's called secondary consumers? Because it eats a primary consumer. Okay, it doesn't eat the plant directly. Okay, it eats the living organism that ate the plant. Okay, so here, so we have now two types of consumers. We said the primary consumers that eat the producers, and the secondary consumers that eat the primary consumers. And then we have the third type of consumers. It's called tertiary consumers. And tertiary consumers, this is a type of consumers that eat the secondary consumers. As you see here, this is a crocodile, and the crocodile eats the bird, who eats the butterfly that eat the plant. So here we have a chain, okay, called the food chain. As you see here, it is started by the plant, which is the producer. Any food chain starts with a producer, okay? And then we have consumer number one, which is the butterfly. We call it primary consumer because it eats the producer. And then we have consumer number two, the bird, that we call it secondary consumers. And why? Because they eat the primary consumers. And then we have the consumer number three, which is tertiary consumers. And why it has this name? Because it eats the secondary consumers. So we have a chain. And those are the types of consumers. Primary consumers, animals that eat plants like insects. Secondary consumers, animals that eat primary consumers as birds. And we have tertiary consumers. Here TIA make the sound ch. So we have tertiary consumers, animals that eat secondary consumers, and those most of the time be large meat eating animals like alligators or crocodiles. Here talked about living organisms that can be classified into three groups. We talked about the producers and then the consumers. Okay, then we have decomposers. So what do you think about the decomposers? What is the rule of the decomposers? As you know, all living organisms die. Okay, so what happens when the living organisms die, even it is a plant or animal, human? Here it is the rule of decomposers. Okay, they are organisms that carry out the process of decomposition. It comes from, this process comes from its name, decomposers. So they decompose. This is a verb, and the process called decomposition. So the decomposer breaking down or decaying dead organisms. So here, so when the decomposers decompose or breaking down or decay the dead organisms, they return the energy and the nutrients back to the ecosystem. So it recycles the ecosystem. So here the nutrients become in the soil, and the plant take these nutrients and use them in the photosynthesis and make its own food, and so on. The food chain continue. Okay, what is the function or the rule of the decomposers? They recycle nutrients back into the ecosystem through a process called the decomposition of dead organisms. Okay, what are the decomposers? As fungi and bacteria, worms, and living organisms that called millipedes. Millipedes here, milli means thousands, okay, and beds mean legs. So this is a living organism that have many legs, so they called millipedes. Okay, those are decomposers that recycle the nutrients back into the ecosystem from the dead organisms. So now we classify the living organisms into producers, consumers, and decomposers. And in the consumers, we have three types of consumers: primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. Okay, so here decomposers like worms and millipedes eat dead matter and produce waste, which is rich in nutrients that increase the soil fertility for plant growth. The soil be rich in nutrients, so this soil is fertile, or the soil fertility increases. Okay, so here worms and millipedes eat dead matter, dead organisms, and produce waste rich in nutrients. So these nutrients found in the soil, and these nutrients make the soil fertility increases. So this is very useful for the plant growth, as it takes the nutrients from the soil. So food chain, this is the flow of energy through an ecosystem, can be represented by a model called food chain, as we can draw a diagram, okay, or model that represent the flow of energy. Starts from the plant to animals to another animals until it ended by the decomposers. Okay, so this is the food chain. So we can define food chain as it is a model that shows how energy passes from one organism to another in the ecosystem. We have an example here. We have, as you see here, this is plant. Okay, so the plant is a producer, and this is the first link in the food chain. And then this plant eaten by the mouse. So the mouse here is primary consumer, and this mouse is eaten by the snake. So the snake here is the secondary consumer. After that, this snake is eaten by eagle. So the eagle here is tertiary consumer. So here this is the food chain, as it starts with the producer, and this is the first link, and the consumers, even it's primary, secondary, tertiary, and this is called the second link in the food chain. What is the final link? What do you think? Yes, something missed here. We have producer and the consumers. Yes, so the final link will be the decomposers. They decompose the dead organisms and recycle nutrients, which mean energy, back into the ecosystem. And the decomposers, which are the final link, may be worms or bacteria, fungi, and millipedes. Okay, here we have activity 6, energy flow. All organisms need energy to do their activities, and this energy flows through the ecosystem, as we saw, as animals can't obtain their energy directly from the sun as the plants. Okay, so they eat another animals. So food chain shows the food relationship, or we can say energy relationships, because they get the food, so they get energy. So it is a food relationship or energy relationship among organisms in different ecosystems. So when we see the food chain, so we know that this is a producer and this is the consumers, and those are the decomposers, because the energy relationship is shown in this food chain. Okay, so here we have an example. Plant makes its own food, then a mouse eats the plant to get energy. Okay, a mouse here is a primary consumer, and then this mouse is eaten by the snake. So the snake here is secondary consumer, and the snake get the energy from eating the mouse. And then the hawk eats the snake. So the hawk here is the tertiary consumer, and it gets its energy from the snake. So this is food chain, as you see here now, this is the food chain that represent the energy relationship between living organisms. Start with the plant, which is producer, and then we have the mouse, which is the primary consumer, and it also is a prey for the snake. The prey is the animal that it is hunted or eaten by another animal, like the mouse here. And then after the snake eats the mouse, yum yum, so it is eaten by the hawk. So here the snake is a prey for the hawk. Here the snake is a prey for the hawk, and the hawk eats it, and also it is a predator for the mouse because it eats the mouse here. So what is the meaning of predator and prey? Prey, animal that be hunted and eaten by another animal, and predator is the animal or consumer that hunts and eat another animals. Okay, so we will end our lesson by these two questions. Give reasons for human needs to eat some animals and plants. Why this happened? To get energy to do his activities. Okay, and the other question, give reasons for sunlight is important for all living organisms, and this is a very important question. Okay, so the answer will be because the plants absorb sun